Hello everyone, welcome back to the Chess Geek channel. Hopefully you guys are doing good. As always, I'm super excited to present the exchange variation of the Caro-Kann. Now, I am particularly looking forward for this video here because the exchange variation has a very big reputation of being boring, being uneventful, unless white plays the immediate c4 and creates some tension in the center, which is known as the Panov. We're going to look at this opening in the next chapter. If white doesn't do this and they play a move like c3, we have a very solid structure for both players, and both players often just develop their pieces. There isn't really a plan that's easy to generate for either side, and we just kind of play the opening without much thought. And so I'm very excited to share a very new and fresh take on the exchange variation. I haven't seen this recommendation being recommended really from anyone, so I'm very excited to show you what I have to share. However, before we delve into the ideas and recommendations in this exchange Caro, I think it will be helpful to show you a different opening, a reference opening. So bear with me for a second as I switch to the white side. I want to show you an opening which arises from the Queen's Gambit from d4. Now, if you play d4, perhaps you've seen this. I think this is known as the positional line, which I don't think is necessarily too exciting, but it does illustrate a super nice idea that we're going to try to apply to our Caro recommendation. So, e3 is a very logical move here. They can castle, we go bishop to d3, and okay, there's a number of ways that this position can develop, but let's say we get something like this. Now, in this position here, one of the nice things is that this is a very well-known pawn structure. We have the Carlsbad pawn structure, where black basically has an advantage over here, 4v3 pawns on the queen side, and we have a pawn majority on the king side, 4v3 on the king side. And the way that often white plays these sort of positions, the classical way to play the Carlsbad, well, there's two real options. You can go for a minority attack, which for a long time was seen as the most effective way, but recently it's been realized that black has quite a lot of ways to try to deal with that. Many of those ways are actually aggressive ways, including a move like a5 at the right time. So the move f3 and e4, this center expansion, has become extremely common from the Carlsbad, from this exact position and other positions like this. And we're going to apply a similar idea in our Caro, because if you notice, with the Caro, we actually get a very similar pawn structure, where it's almost reversed. If you notice here, they have a majority on the queen side, like they had before, and we have one on the king side over here. And so we're going to go for a very similar idea. We develop our knight. We don't place the knight on f6 to keep open the possibility of going f6. Again, that was the key idea. f3 and e4, this expansion in the center, that is what we're going to replicate and apply to our position. So the general basic setup: we develop our knight, we develop our bishop, we go e6, develop our other bishop, we develop our knight to e7, very critical, and then after we castle, we have this ability to expand f6, e5, potentially e4, and go for a very initiative-based development of the opening. So I think this is a very exciting way to play. Be sure to leave your thoughts down below. I'm quite proud of myself for thinking of this. I think it's hopefully going to spice out this otherwise pretty boring position. So definitely let me know what you think below. So we have a couple of things we're going to look at here. There's going to be two game examples we're going to focus on. Let's begin with knight f3. We go bishop g4, they go bishop e2, we can play e6, they castle, bishop d6, they go rook e1. They're just playing natural moves, and I'm basically playing the moves I just showed, right? Developing everything in the logical move order. We go knight e7, again keeping open this f6 idea, and bishop g5 was played. We're now following a game from 2012, and you can see that black plays queen to c7. This is another important move, by the way. The pin here can often be annoying. You can sometimes remedy that by going f6, but usually it's better for the queen anyways to have some influence on the center and some influence on h2. So after you play bishop d6, queen to c7, as is very typical in the Carlsbad, with the white side, you go queen c2. This is a very normal and effective way to set up your queen and bishop. So this is definitely a key point. So h3, bishop to h5, we can castle, and eventually we can play f6. Notice we didn't really rush with that. I mean, you could consider, depending on the circumstance, to go f6 immediately in certain positions, but there's no reason to do that. We can develop, we can get our king safe, castle, and then begin to expand. f6, we go knight f5. Notice the bishop is attacked. g4 was played here, a very committal choice, and bishop f7. This is another very important idea that is super typical, both, again, from the white side. The bishop comes and then reroutes to f2, and now that we're applying this with the Caro-Kann, same thing. The bishop develops to g4, and in view of h3, sometimes g4, but even without g4, the bishop has a very nice home on f7, where it supports the expansion of e5 by defending this d5 square. If we were to rush with e5, there's many cases where our pawn is just going to fall. So we're playing in a very ambitious way in the center, so we need to have the support and solid structure and piece placement to support that. So bishop to f7 is certainly trying to do that. It's a great way to get ready to play e5. Bishop to d3. So rook to e8 was played here, centralizing, again trying to go e5. Queen to c2. Notice the pawn here is attacked, so g6 is a very logical way to stop that attack. Another point of the bishop here, it defends the center, but also defends here, because otherwise there would be potential sacrifices you had to watch out for, maybe starting with the bishop and then queen takes could definitely be an issue. So the bishop, although it seems passive, it has potentially the most important role of all of these pieces. So we go g6, the bishop comes to f4. This is another key idea, especially if g4 has already been committed and they can't go g3. It's nice to get the bishop out before you go e5, because otherwise the fear is that you go e5, blocking the bishop, and even though there's so much tension and likely e4 will come, or taking, or there will take, something will happen, there's still that fear that the bishop is currently trapped behind its own pawn. So putting the bishop out to f4, super effective way to continue. And now e5. Finally, the move happens. And once e5 is played, if you can play e5 without losing a pawn, without losing your center or control in other areas of the board, if you can safely get away with e5, I would say you've more or less completely equalized, potentially fighting for an edge. So this is really the ideal circumstance we're going for. So they take, we take. Notice that the rook, in this case, f came to e8. Often the a rook is more effective in leaving the rook here, because whenever they take, then the f file can open up. So perhaps some improvements from this game, some things you can apply to your own game. This rook isn't doing much. Yes, it can come to d8, and it likely will, but it's often more effective if there's the potential for this f file to open up to structure your rooks on f8 and e8. Okay, bishop f1. We continue to expand. We are digging some clear holes in this position, and the knight comes into d3, and here a stunning resource. Knight takes f2, and the tactics begin. Queen to g3, picking back the piece, and okay, some repetitions, but ultimately black resigned after the move e3 here, and there's just way too much pressure. The rook, the queen, the pawn, and it's completely game over. That wasn't really anything special. I mean, we got a crushing position, but we didn't do anything particularly impressive. We just developed our pieces in the setup that I'm recommending, and then expanded with f6. We made sure, of course, to defend this h7 pawn when needed, so g6, but ultimately e5, right? And then e4, and the game really played itself, and that is what tends to happen in these sort of positions. Now, after knight to c6, I want to show a few other options, because knight f3 is perhaps the least ambitious way for white to play. They can improve this with playing bishop to f4 first, and their point is they're not giving us bishop to g4, which is clearly the best square for the bishop. But we can't play e6. This bishop would be way too hurt if we were to play e6. So bishop f5 is my recommendation. Yes, the bishop is slightly less active than it would be on g4, but we're still going to go for that same setup, and ultimately this bishop still certainly serves a valuable purpose. So I'll just quickly show how this could develop. Bishop d6, queen d6. This also shows a difference if they were to trade the bishops in this position, which is also a different approach for them. But we play very similarly, right? We go f6, and you know, we eventually want to go e5. There's no rush, so we're very happy to go first rook a to e8, and this I would consider really the dream setup. We've got the two rooks lined up perfectly. We have f6 preparing e5. We have sufficient defense on d6 by the queen and the knight, and if necessary, bishop to g6 and bishop f7 is still an existing idea that it can be very powerful. And once again, once we get e5, which at this point is more or less inevitable, we've equalized, I think it's safe to say. So that is, I think, a very exciting way to play against bishop f4. I want to show one final other option, which is bishop to d3. And this, I think, is the most ambitious, too ambitious way to play. White's idea is strategically very sound. They're stopping us from going to g4, and unlike bishop to f4, they're also stopping us from going to f5. So they're basically seemingly forcing us to go e6 and lock in our bishop. But we're not going to budge. We're not going to go e6 here. We go e5. And this is why both knight f3 and bishop to f4 are really the only options here, because they both control e5. Again, as I mentioned in this video numerous times, if we can get e5, we've equalized. Most of the time, that, you know, consisted of first going f6 and then going e5 because they had sufficient control over this dark square e5. However, here, if they play bishop to d3, we go e5 immediately. And because the tactics work out, because we can safely get away with e5, I think we've equalized, and we're already fighting for an edge. And I'll just quickly mention, after d takes, knight takes, and queen to e2, the tactics are not scary here. We go queen to e7, cutting the communication between this queen and king, so f4 does not win the knight. In fact, f4 would actually win us a piece, because we would take this bishop on d3 and they cannot recapture. So I have a game also from this position, because I do assume that bishop to d3 you will see quite a couple of times. They're trying to play very strategically safe, forgetting that e5 is possible. So I do want to show a quick game here as well, which was an endgame. But again, in this endgame, because we managed to play e5, we fought for center control. Namely, we traded off this d4 pawn, which otherwise would be a very annoying pawn here. We've equalized, and you know, although there's a ton of play left, all of the minor pieces are on the board. This is by no means an easy draw for either side. It's a very fun and tension-filled position. It's not that, you know, it doesn't seem like we're in the black pieces, right? Both players are kind of playing around, fighting. You have equal chances to win this as your opponent, and as black, that's all you can ever hope for. So we had some trades in this game. Okay, a very interesting pawn structure. The king began to activate. Both kings did. The king indeed activated quite a lot here, getting all the way into d3, into the heart of white's position. And ultimately, this passed pawn ended up sealing the deal, because it forced white to take it, which allowed us to take here. And unfortunately, this knight is passive, this pawn is weak, our king is active, we have the two bishops. Happy days. And indeed, we ended up converting this. I'm breezing right through this game because my intention is not so much this exact endgame, but more so this beginning, right? So trading into this endgame after bishop e5 check, knight to c6, this endgame is by no means bad for us. You should be happy to go into this, and you just develop as you see, right? Very normal development. The bishops come in, you know, very natural way to place their pieces here. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you like my recommendations. I did spend quite some time trying to figure this out, because I'll admit the exchange otherwise is super boring, and I was actually fearing making this video for that reason. I didn't have a very fun way to play against the exchange, but hopefully I've now found one in view of this Carlsbad sort of way to play, with putting the knight on e7 and pushing forward with f6, e5. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you are new around here. Like this video if you did indeed learn something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.